"Worthless woman!" my mother-in-law Evelyn screamed, her voice echoing through the sterile hospital hallway. "What good are you if you can't even give us grandchildren?" I sat there in the plastic chair, my hands trembling as I clutched the medical report that had just shattered my world. The words irreversible infertility blurred through my tears as I tried to process what Dr. Williams had just told us. My husband James stood beside his mother, his face a mask of disappointment that cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever felt. My name is Victoria, and this was the moment my life as I knew it ended. I was 28 years old, living in Portland, Oregon, and I had just learned that I would never be able to have biological children. The polycystic ovary syndrome had progressed too far, the damage too extensive. After 3 years of trying to conceive, countless doctor visits, and endless hope, the verdict was final. "We spent a fortune on your treatments," James muttered, not even looking at me. "All for nothing." Evelyn crossed her arms, her cold eyes fixed on me with pure disgust. "I told James he should have married someone else, someone who could actually fulfill her duties as a wife." The words hit me like physical blows. I had loved James since college, had devoted myself completely to our marriage and his family's expectations. I worked part-time at a local veterinary clinic while spending most of my energy trying to become the perfect wife and daughter-in-law they wanted. I cooked elaborate Sunday dinners, maintained their pristine house, and endured Evelyn's constant criticism with a smile. "Maybe we should consider adoption," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Evelyn's laugh was cruel and sharp. "Adoption? You think we want some stranger's unwanted child? The whole point is to continue the family bloodline, not raise someone else's mistakes." James finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my stomach drop. "My mother's right, Victoria. This changes everything. I married you expecting children, a real family. What's the point now?" I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized the two people I had sacrificed everything for were looking at me like I was broken merchandise. The love I thought we shared, the life we had built together. It all meant nothing compared to their obsession with biological heirs. "So what are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I'm saying you need to think about what you can offer this family now," Evelyn said with a satisfied smirk. "Because right now, you're just taking up space." As we walked to the parking garage in tense silence, I caught a glimpse of something in James's expression that chilled me to the bone. He was already planning something, and I had a sinking feeling that my worst fears were about to come true. Growing up, I had always been the girl who put others first. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, leaving me completely alone in the world. When I met James during my junior year at Portland State University, he seemed like a gift from heaven. Handsome, charming, and from a wealthy family that welcomed me with what I thought was genuine warmth. Evelyn had been different back then, or at least she had hidden her true nature better. She would invite me to family dinners, ask about my studies, and even helped me find my job at the veterinary clinic after graduation. I thought I had found not just a husband, but a real family to replace the one I had lost. The Wilson family owned 3 successful car dealerships across the city, and they lived in a beautiful house in the hills overlooking downtown Portland. James worked in the family business alongside his father Henry, who had always been kinder to me than Evelyn, but rarely stood up to his wife. They had money, status, and clear expectations about how their lives should unfold. From the moment James proposed, Evelyn made it clear that my primary job would be producing grandchildren. She would make comments about how she couldn't wait to spoil her future grandbabies, how important it was to have children while we were young, and how disappointed she would be if we waited too long. I had wanted children too, so her enthusiasm seemed like a blessing rather than the pressure it actually was. When we didn't conceive immediately, the comments became more frequent and pointed. Evelyn would suggest fertility diets, recommend specialists, and constantly ask intrusive questions about our private life. She even went so far as to schedule my first doctor's appointment without asking, claiming she just wanted to help. "There's nothing wrong with getting a head start on testing," she had said with that fake sweet smile she used when she was being manipulative. Better to catch any problems early. The months of testing and treatments had been emotionally and physically exhausting. Every appointment brought new hope followed by crushing disappointment. Evelyn became increasingly impatient, making comments about how long everything was taking and suggesting maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. James began pulling away during this time, spending more hours at work and less time talking to me about anything meaningful. When I tried to discuss my fears about the fertility treatments, he would change the subject or suggest I talk to his mother instead. I realized now that he was already starting to see me as a failure. The worst part was how isolated I became. I had given up most of my friendships to focus on being the perfect wife, and Evelyn made sure I stayed too busy with family obligations to maintain the few relationships I had left. My coworkers at the clinic were friendly, but I was too embarrassed to share what I was going through. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs I ignored. The way Evelyn's kindness always came with strings attached. How James expected me to handle all the emotional labor in our relationship while he focused on business. The subtle ways they made me feel like I had to earn my place in their family rather than being welcomed as an equal member. But that day in the hospital, when the doctor delivered his final verdict, all pretense fell away. The drive home from the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of my life. James stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, occasionally muttering under her breath about defective women and wasted time. I huddled in the back seat, feeling like a child being taken home after disappointing her parents at a school function. When we arrived at the house, Evelyn immediately called Henry to share the news. I could hear her dramatic retelling from the kitchen, where she painted me as some sort of deceiver who had tricked their poor innocent son into marriage under false pretenses. "She knew," Evelyn was saying. "Women always know when something's wrong with their bodies. She probably knew before they even got married and just didn't tell us." That wasn't true, of course. I had no idea about the severity of my condition until the doctors explained it that day. But I was learning that truth didn't matter much to the Wilson family when it didn't serve their narrative. James found me sitting at the kitchen table, still holding the medical report. He sat down across from me, and for a moment I thought maybe we could work through this together. Maybe we could explore other options, or at least grieve this loss as a team. "Victoria, we need to talk about our situation," he said, his voice cold and formal like he was conducting a business meeting. "I know this is disappointing," I began, "but we have options. We could try IVF with donor eggs or adoption or—" "No." His interruption was sharp and final. "My mother and I have been discussing this, and we think it's best if you move out." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Move out? James, we're married. This is our home." "Actually, it's my family's home," he corrected me. "And frankly, what's the point of staying married if you can't give me children? I'm 30 years old. I don't want to waste more time on a dead-end relationship." I stared at him in disbelief. This was the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. "You want a divorce?" "I want you gone," he said bluntly. "You can have whatever clothes and personal items you brought when you moved in, but everything else stays here. The car is in my name, and obviously you can't stay in the house." Evelyn appeared in the doorway, clearly having finished her phone call. "We've been more than generous with you, Victoria. We paid for your expensive treatments, gave you a beautiful home, and welcomed you into our family. It's not our fault you turned out to be broken." The word broken echoed in my mind as I sat there, trying to process the speed at which my entire life was being dismantled. These people I had loved and served and sacrificed for were throwing me away like garbage the moment I couldn't give them what they wanted. "You have until tomorrow evening to pack your things and find somewhere else to go," James added. "I'll be filing for divorce next week on grounds of inability to fulfill marital obligations." As I looked at their satisfied faces, something hardened inside me. They thought they were discarding a broken, worthless woman, They had no idea who they were really dealing with. I spent that night in a cheap motel near the airport, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and trying to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely in the span of 12 hours. I had $67 in my checking account, a small savings account with about $800 that James didn't know about, and nowhere to go. The next morning, I called in sick to work and began the humiliating process of packing my belongings. James had already left for the dealership, but Evelyn stationed herself in the living room like a guard, making sure I didn't take anything she considered theirs. This included wedding gifts we had received together, furniture we had picked out as a couple, and even some of my own books that she claimed were now family property, since they had been on the family bookshelves. "Don't even think about taking that casserole dish," she barked, when I reached for a ceramic dish my late mother had given me before she died. I've grown quite fond of it. I wanted to fight her on it, but I was so emotionally drained that I just let her have it. I let her have everything except my clothes, my laptop, and a small jewelry box with my mother's ring, the only thing I had left of my parents. As I loaded my single suitcase into the trunk of a taxi, Evelyn delivered her final blow. "You know, Victoria, I never liked you. You were always too needy, too desperate to please. James deserves someone with breeding, someone who can actually contribute to this family's legacy. You're just a sad little orphan who was never going to be good enough." Her words were designed to shatter whatever remained of my confidence, and for a moment they almost succeeded. But as the taxi pulled away from the house where I had spent 3 years trying to earn love that was never real, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about Evelyn's approval or James's disappointment. I didn't have to pretend to enjoy family dinners where they talked about me like I wasn't there, or smile through passive-aggressive comments about my cooking or cleaning. I was free from their suffocating expectations and conditional love. I spent the next week in a series of cheap motels, using my laptop to search for affordable apartments and full-time jobs. My part-time position at the veterinary clinic barely covered my basic expenses. But Dr. Martinez, my supervisor, was understanding when I explained my situation in vague terms. "Victoria, you're one of our best technicians," she said during our conversation about increasing my hours. "We've actually been thinking about expanding our services to include a mobile clinic for house calls. Would you be interested in managing that program?" The opportunity was a lifeline I desperately needed. The mobile clinic would mean a significant pay increase and the chance to build something meaningful from scratch. For the first time since receiving my diagnosis, I felt a spark of hope about the future. As I worked late into the night, developing the business plan for the mobile clinic, I couldn't help thinking about James and Evelyn. They had thrown me away because they thought I was worthless, a broken woman with nothing to offer. They had no idea that they had just freed me to discover my own potential. I found a small studio apartment in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and entirely mine. As I signed the lease with my first month's rent and deposit, nearly wiping out my savings, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life so successful and fulfilling that they would regret ever underestimating me. I didn't know then that within 5 years, I would have the power to destroy them completely. All I knew was that I was done being their victim, and I was ready to find out who Victoria really was when she didn't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I was starting to find my footing. The mobile veterinary clinic was more successful than anyone had anticipated, and I had been promoted to head of the new department. My days were filled with house calls to elderly pet owners and busy families who couldn't easily get to the clinic, and I discovered I had a natural talent for business management. More importantly, I was learning to enjoy my own company. My small studio apartment had become a sanctuary filled with plants, books, and the kind of peaceful silence I never experienced in the Wilson house. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions based solely on what I wanted, not what would please someone else. I was returning from a particularly satisfying day of appointments when I received a call that would change everything. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. "Is this Victoria Turner?" The voice was professional but warm. "Yes, this is Victoria. My name is David Morrison. I'm a private investigator, and I've been hired to locate you regarding a matter of inheritance." My heart skipped. I had no living relatives that I knew of, and my parents had died with nothing but debt. "I think you have the wrong person. You were born Victoria Lynn Turner on March 15th, correct? Parents were Robert and Helen Turner?" "Yes, but—" "Miss Turner, your father had an older brother named William Turner. He passed away recently and left a substantial inheritance to his only living relative. You." I had to sit down on my apartment steps. "I don't understand. My father never mentioned having a brother." "According to the documents I have, there was a falling out between the brothers in their 20s. William tried to reconnect several times over the years, but your father refused all contact. William never married or had children, and when he learned of your parents' death, he spent considerable resources trying to find you. Unfortunately, your marriage name change made you difficult to locate." The investigator explained that my Uncle William had been a successful tech entrepreneur who sold his company for $47 million 3 years ago. He had been living quietly in Seattle, managing his investments and searching for his lost family. His will left everything to me, along with a letter explaining why he had never given up looking. "There are some legal procedures to complete, but you're looking at inheriting approximately $52 million, plus properties in Seattle and Vancouver." I dropped the phone. When I called back 10 minutes later, after confirming this wasn't an elaborate scam, David Morrison was patient with my questions and emotional reactions. He arranged to meet me the following day with William's attorney to begin the inheritance process. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the letter William had written, which David had read excerpts from. My uncle had expressed deep regret about the estrangement from his brother and his determination to find me after learning I was alone in the world. He had followed my life from a distance, proud of my work with animals, and heartbroken when he learned about my divorce. "She deserves to know she's not alone," the letter said. "She deserves to have choices and opportunities that weren't available to her before. I hope this inheritance helps her build the life she truly wants." As I processed this unexpected gift, I thought about James and Evelyn. They had thrown me away believing I was worthless, a woman with nothing to offer their precious family legacy. They had no idea that while they were busy congratulating themselves on getting rid of me, I had become one of the wealthiest women in Oregon. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't ready to act on it yet. First, I needed to learn how to navigate this new reality and decide exactly what kind of life I wanted to build with my uncle's generous gift. The inheritance process took 3 months to complete, during which I continued working at the veterinary clinic and living in my studio apartment. I didn't want to make any dramatic changes until everything was finalized, and I had time to process this life-altering event. David Morrison became not just my investigator, but a trusted advisor, helping me understand the scope of William's holdings and connecting me with financial planners and attorneys. When the money finally transferred to my accounts, the reality hit me all at once. I was no longer Victoria Turner, struggling divorcee trying to rebuild her life. I was Victoria Turner, multimillionaire, with the power to do whatever I chose. My first major decision was about my living situation. I could have bought a mansion, but instead, I purchased a beautiful contemporary house in the Pearl District, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a stunning view of the city. It was elegant, but not ostentatious. Sophisticated, but still warm enough to feel like home. The second decision was about my career. I loved working with animals, but I wanted to expand my impact. Using $2 million of my inheritance, I established the Turner Foundation for Animal Welfare, focusing on providing veterinary care to low-income families and supporting no-kill shelters throughout the Pacific Northwest. As my foundation grew, I found myself moving in different social circles. I attended charity events, sat on nonprofit boards, and met other philanthropists and business leaders. It was at a foundation board meeting that I first met Alexander Kane. Alexander was everything James had never been: intelligent, kind, genuinely interested in making the world better, and completely unimpressed by my wealth. He ran a successful, sustainable energy company and served on several non-profit boards purely because he believed in giving back. When he asked me to dinner after our third board meeting, I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I have to be honest, I told him over coffee one afternoon, several weeks into what had become a friendship with romantic undertones. I've been divorced for about 2 years. It didn't end well. Want to talk about it? He asked, his gray eyes full of genuine concern. For the first time since my marriage ended, I told someone the whole story. About the infertility diagnosis, the cruel words, being thrown out like garbage. Alexander listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions, but never making me feel like my pain was something to be fixed or minimized. They threw away someone extraordinary, he said finally, but their loss gave you the freedom to become who you were meant to be. 6 months later, Alexander proposed to me during a quiet weekend at his cabin in the mountains. He knew about my inheritance by then, but he also knew I would have been just as worthy of love when I was living in that studio apartment with $67 to my name. I want to build a life with you, he said as he got down on one knee. Whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us. You're not broken, Victoria. You're perfect, exactly as you are. As I said yes through happy tears, I thought about how wrong Evelyn had been. She had called me worthless because I couldn't give them biological children, never understanding that my value as a human being had nothing to do with my reproductive capacity. Alexander and I began planning our future together, including our shared dream of adopting children who needed loving homes. We started the process immediately, excited about the possibility of giving a child the kind of stable, unconditionally loving family I had always wanted. But first, there was something I needed to do. It was time to show James and Evelyn exactly how worthless I had become. 2 years after Alexander and I married in a simple ceremony surrounded by true friends, we received the call we had been waiting for. Our adoption was approved, and we were matched with twin 4-year-old siblings, Grace and Michael, who needed a permanent home together. The day we brought them home was the happiest of my life. Watching Alexander help Grace arrange her stuffed animals on her new bed, seeing Michael's shy smile when I read him his first bedtime story in our house, I understood what real family meant. It had nothing to do with genetics or bloodlines, and everything to do with chosen love and commitment. Around the same time our family was coming together, I started hearing disturbing rumors about the Wilson family business. David Morrison, who had become a close friend, mentioned that he had been hired by several former Wilson dealership customers who claimed they had been defrauded. Apparently they've been selling cars with rolled-back odometers and forged maintenance records, he told me over lunch. The state attorney general is investigating, and it looks like criminal charges are likely. My first instinct was satisfaction. After everything they had put me through, seeing them face consequences for their actions felt like cosmic justice. But as David shared more details about the scope of their illegal activities, I realized this was bigger than simple karma. Victoria, David said carefully, there's something else. They've been doing this for years, probably since before you were married to James, which means they were using dirty money to pay for those fertility treatments they always held over your head. The irony was almost too perfect. They had thrown me away after spending money on my medical care, then used my supposed debt to them as another weapon in their arsenal of cruelty. Now it turned out that money had been stolen from innocent customers all along. I want to do something, I told Alexander that evening as we tucked Grace and Michael into bed. What do you have in mind? He asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. They're going to lose everything when this investigation concludes. They'll probably have to declare bankruptcy to pay legal fees and settlements. When that happens, I want to be there. Alexander kissed my forehead. My brilliant, vengeful wife. What are you planning? I smiled as I outlined my idea. It was petty and dramatic and absolutely perfect. The bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in downtown Portland. I had been tracking the Wilson family's legal troubles through David's contacts and public records, watching as their empire crumbled under the weight of investigation and lawsuits. James and Evelyn would be required to appear in court to surrender their assets and explain their financial situation to creditors. It would be the most humiliating day of their privileged lives, and I wanted them to see exactly what they had thrown away. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a perfectly tailored designer suit, my hair styled elegantly, carrying a leather portfolio that contained our adoption paperwork and a few recent photos of our family. Alexander was beside me, looking devastatingly handsome in his custom navy suit, holding a folder with his business information. As we walked into the courtroom, I spotted them immediately. James looked haggard and desperate, his expensive clothes wrinkled and his face showing the stress of the past months. Evelyn appeared to have aged a decade, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, and her famous confidence nowhere to be seen. They were sitting with their attorney, heads bent over documents, when I deliberately walked past their table to find seats in the gallery. James looked up first, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and pure shock. "Victoria?" he whispered, loud enough for Evelyn to hear. She whipped around so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash. Her mouth fell open as she took in my transformation. The expensive clothes, the confident posture, the handsome man beside me, the undeniable aura of success and happiness. "Hello, James." "Evelyn," I said pleasantly, as if we were running into each other at a coffee shop instead of their financial ruin. "How lovely to see you again." I took my seat and opened my portfolio, making sure they could see the adoption papers inside. Then I waited for the hearing to begin, savoring every moment of their obvious panic and confusion about why I was there. The revenge I had been planning for 3 years was finally about to unfold. The bankruptcy hearing was everything I had hoped it would be. James and Evelyn lost their house, their car dealerships, and their social standing when the criminal charges were filed. James was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud, while Evelyn was forced to move into a small apartment and take a job as a grocery store cashier to pay her legal debts. Their cruelty and greed had finally caught up with them, leaving them with nothing but the bitter taste of consequences they had spent years avoiding. The woman they had called worthless and thrown away like trash was now living a life of purpose and abundance, while they faced each day knowing their own actions had destroyed everything they once held dear. As I walked out of that courthouse hand in hand with Alexander, my heart full of love for our adopted children waiting at home, I felt a profound sense of closure about the path my life had taken. The future stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility. More children to love, more lives to touch through our foundation, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. Looking back on my journey from their victim to my own victor, I realized that their rejection had been the greatest gift they could have given me, freeing me to discover who I truly was when I stopped trying to earn love that was never real.